There's been a tremendous revival of pilgrimage in recent years in Europe. I mean, there's always been lots of pilgrimages to Mecca, in India, in Iran. There are huge pilgrimages with millions of people walking from one shrine to another. But in Europe, which is a very secular part of the world, pilgrimage more or less died out in the 20th century. There were still local pilgrimages in Catholic countries, but as a huge phenomenon, which it is in many parts of the world, it didn't really exist in the way it used to in the Middle Ages. But the revival has been dramatic. In 1987, when the route to Santiago de Compostela was reopened with places for pilgrims to stay, refugios, and the infrastructure for walking there. 1,000 people walked there in 1987. It was soon after it had been re-established. Last year, 2019, 330,000 people walked to Santiago de Compostela. Some also went by bicycle and some went on horseback. So there's been this tremendous growth, and here in Britain, the British Pilgrimage Trust is reopening the old way from Southampton or Winchester to Canterbury in 19 days, walking over the South Downs and through extraordinarily beautiful scenery. And this year, the British Pilgrimage Trust launched 42 new one-day pilgrimage routes to every one of the cathedrals in England. When I say new, I mean recently reopened. I mean, these are ancient sites of pilgrimage, but they've been re-established, and now you can walk there and do a 5 or 6 mile walk on a short pilgrimage. This is actually a really nice way of doing a pilgrimage. I myself do one of these one-day pilgrimages every year. I have a teenage godson, and when he was 14, I couldn't think what to give him. I don't give stuff anymore. I give experiences. And so because I was interested in pilgrimage, I offered him a birthday present in June, when his birthday is, of walking together on a pilgrimage to Canterbury, through the fields, on footpaths, through meadows, through woods and orchards, to Canterbury Cathedral. I didn't know whether he'd want to do that or not, but he loved the idea, and we had a most wonderful day. We arrived at the cathedral, we lit candles at the shrine of St. Thomas Becket, we had a cream tea, and we went to choral evensong, this beautiful sung service that happens every day in the English cathedrals. You don't have to be a paid up practicing Christian to go to this. It's open to everyone. And indeed, the British Pilgrimage Trust, when it leads guided pilgrimages, has as one of its slogans, "Bring your own beliefs." The people going on these pilgrimages are certainly not all totally devout Christians or members of other religions. A lot of people are agnostic or spiritual but not religious. And I think it's something that for many people is a physical expression of a spiritual quest. If you're on a spiritual journey, then actually making it real by walking to a holy place is a very, very good way of doing it. So there's a wide range of choice, and these include pilgrimages to the sources of rivers, to ancient trees and holy wells, to pre-Christian holy places, and of course also to great Christian holy places like medieval churches, ruined monasteries, and cathedrals. The basis of pilgrimage, I think, is very deep, archetypal. I think that's one reason it's taking off so much in modern Europe. The deep archetype, I think, comes from the fact that our ancestors were hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers can't just stay in one place, so animals don't come to them to be hunted, and fruit and nuts and roots and so on don't just drop into their laps. They have to go around the landscape in accordance with the changing seasons. As they do so, they go to places of significance with stories, and those are the kind of primal, ancestral holy places they visit. in Australia, the Australian Aborigines sing the stories of these places on their journey in what are called song lines. They tell the story, they give meaning to the journey and the places, and they have a history. Now, I think when the Neolithic Revolution occurred and people settled down in particular places, then they still had this urge to go together at sacred places. Stonehenge, for example, here in England, was not at the center of a city like temples were in Sumeria and Babylonia and Egypt. It wasn't in an urban type setting. Rather, it was in the middle of the countryside, and people would have had to go there for festivals, probably at the solstices and maybe at other times of year. This archetype is found in every religious tradition, and it's all over the world. I lived in India for 7 years, where I worked in an international agricultural institute. There's a tremendous amount of pilgrimage in India. There are pilgrimages among Muslims. In India, many Muslims go to the shrines of Sufi saints on pilgrimages called dargahs. And of course, one of the pillars of Islam is to make a pilgrimage to Mecca, if you can. Jewish people go on pilgrimages to Jerusalem. And in the Middle Ages, the whole of Europe was crisscrossed with pilgrimage routes. Here in England, by far the most famous was the pilgrimage to the shrine of St. Thomas Becket in Canterbury Cathedral. And Chaucer's book, The Canterbury Tales, one of the first books in recognizable English, is about stories the pilgrims told each other on their journey to Canterbury. And it was written around 1390. Another great place of pilgrimage in England was the shrine of Our Lady at Walsingham, the Black Madonna of Walsingham. The way in which this happened was that people went on these journeys, they stayed in monasteries on the way. The monasteries provided the infrastructure, the places to sleep and get food for pilgrims on their journey. But this came to an end in England and in other parts of Northern Europe through the Protestant Reformation. The Protestant reformers didn't like pilgrimage. They thought they were too Catholic. And also, the Puritans were worried that people were having too much of a nice time on pilgrimages. They were fun. They complained about irregular sexual activity and so forth. There was a desire to suppress them in many Protestant countries, and that happened in England in 1538 with Thomas Cromwell's injunction against pilgrimage. And at the same time, as part of the Reformation here in England, the monasteries were privatized. The monks were driven out, some were executed, some were just pensioned off, and the monasteries were closed down all over England. And that destroyed the infrastructure for pilgrimage. Similar things happened in northern Germany and in Scandinavia, in the Lutheran Protestant countries of Scandinavia. Well, this suppression of pilgrimage, I think, left a kind of vacuum in the soul of English people, which was filled or replaced by a secularized version of pilgrimage a few generations later under the name of tourism. The English invented tourism, first with the Grand Tour on the continent, which rich young men went on. And this involved visiting the great sacred places, among other things, like the ruins of ancient Rome and Greece, St. Peter's in Rome, the great cathedrals of Europe, and so on. So tourism then spread and became more and more widespread in the world. Until it's now, or at least until recently, until the COVID lockdown, was a multi-billion-dollar industry all over the world. And what do tourists go to do? Well, they usually go to see ancient sacred places. Tourists to London visit Westminster Abbey and St. Paul's Cathedral. Tourists to Cologne go to see the cathedral. Tourists to Rome go to the Vatican and St. Peter's. Tourists to Egypt go to the ancient Egyptian temples. Tourists to India go to the great temples and great mosques and great religious tombs like the Taj Mahal. So,
to continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.